All right, so let's continue on in this video series. So in the previous video, we talked about JavaScript data types. That there's primitive data types and there's what we call composite or non-primitive data types. Data types that we would create on our own, right, such as objects and arrays. But the primitive data types are ones that come with the language, like such as numbers, strings, Boolean, and we did a previous example of that. So if I bring up our code from last time here, you'll see that on line 66 through 83, we have some code here that where we declared variables. Just had to fix something there, something that was left over. So here we have student, right? It's a string, and we know that's a string because of the quotations. This is an undefined variable. We just declare it. And then we have a numeric value. Does not have the quotation marks. There's Boolean, there's null, and then here's our non-primitive data types, where we have an array. Is essentially a list. In this case, it's a list of textbooks separated with a comma, and we have to pay attention to the syntax of opening bracket and closing square bracket. And then we have an object. What makes this an object? We have the opening squiggly bracket, and then we have the closing squiggly bracket, and then we have our various attributes nested in between those squiggly brackets. So that's what we talked about in the previous video. We talked about how to declare and initialize a variable. So here, this is a two-step process. So we declare, we said var bucket, and then we assign toString to the variable bucket, right? So this is an example. There's a nice little article that talks about the difference between let, var, and const. So I would invite you to click on this link and just read through the difference between let, var, and const. In this class, we're not going to necessarily be too concerned about the three. We'll most likely use var for most of what we're going to be doing in this class here, but there is a minor difference between the three. So feel free to read through this article to get further context. Here's an activity I would like for you to take a stab at, and it's going to capitalize on some of the things that we've already covered, but it's a 2 bullet point activity here. I want you to declare variables for your name, right? So you can say something such as var name, and then equals whatever your name is, right? You want to basically declare a variable for the number of credits that you'll assign a value to, and then also the number of the program that you're in, the program name. Then you're going to place comments. So we talked about how to do block comments as well as single line comments. So make sure you place a comment above each statement. And remember, each statement ends with a semicolon. So feel free to copy this into an HTML document and begin to achieve these 2 bullet points. Now, you may not understand this window.alert, but if you just use this statement, you can put your text, or you can actually put in as an argument to the alert function your variables and output the information. And we'll do an example of this here later on in this in our video here. But go ahead and take a stab at trying to achieve this. You may, like I said, you may have to Google this or look this up. But I want to see if it'd be a nice activity to get some practice with some of these concepts. All right, so the big one here is called the document object. It's probably one of the most important objects that JavaScript provides to us as developers. But essentially, the document object allows us to manipulate or target certain things within our HTML document. So this next slide here shows a graphic of the structure. It's a tree structure, right? Each one of these are what we call a node, right? So we have the document, we have the root element HTML node, we have the head and the body node. And there are certain things that stem from each of these nodes. So there's element nodes, there's text nodes, there's attribute nodes, right? But JavaScript has the ability to manipulate and target any of these nodes with the document object. And so we've seen the document object in a previous slide, or in our previous example, and we're going to do some more work with that in this video. But here, let me bring this up here. This is a site, W3 Schools, and one of the things that you want to study here is all the various objects that JavaScript provide for you. And so you'll see that there's the array object, there's the date object, there's the document object, right? There's a window object, and that's where that window.alert is coming from. So if you do need help with understanding how to use the window.alert, you can just click on the alert, and it'll show you an example of how that alert method is used. It's taking a little slow there. All right, it's not going to let me open it up, but feel free to visit w3schools.com, and then, here we go. Right, so here's an example, right? We have some string text that we place as our argument, and then when we actually run this program, we click on try it. It'll alert a box with the text within it. Now there's another one called alert window.prompt, which allows you to put some text in, and you can select a button. But nonetheless, that's how the window.alert function works. So let's take a look at the document object. Now, an example that we're going to do in just a few seconds here, it's going to stem we're going to use a lot of properties and methods, or a lot of methods, and then a property from the document object. And the document object is, like I said, is one of the most important objects in JavaScript because it allows us to target certain things within our HTML document. So one of the properties that we'll use in the document object is one called inner HTML. Let's see if we can find it here. Let's go on document.inner HTML. Where's that? I don't see it. Let me just do a quick. I can't find it here, but nonetheless, there is a property called inner HTML. Another one that we'll use is called Gilliam's by tag name, and then Gilliam's by ID, and then Gilliam's by tag name. And these names of these particular methods are kind of telling of what they do. Essentially, this function here gets an element by its ID, right? So it's going to search your document for an element that has the ID attribute or whatever you specify as a value. And then this one here, Gilliam's by tag name, is going to index and put all the various elements that have that tag name into a list, right? And like I said, I'll give a little bit more explanation on both of these here when we actually do an example. All right, so let's actually play around with using some of these properties and methods that come from the document object. All right, so I'm going to bring up my editor. And what I want to do here is just actually show you what we have. So this is what we worked on last time. I did add a little bit more HTML to this document here. This form is actually not needed anymore. That was just something I was playing around with. But anyway, we have a little bit more HTML, and then here's the information that we have from the previous video. What I'm going to do is just going to render this. I'll save this and render this in the browser so you can see what we have. I did add a background image and gave a little bit more style to this document to make it a little bit more presentable. So I'll open up a default browser, and this is what we have, right? Right now we just have two particular buttons or elements that I've created as buttons. And what we're going to do is add some JavaScript. So this button here, when I click on it, it's going to show today's date. And then when I click on this button here, right, it's going to show the student data of all the different data that we stored into the various variables that we declared in the previous video. All right. So, and that's going to show up in this area here where my mouse is hovering. So let's begin to write this program here. And then I'll kind of give a little bit of commentary of what I'm doing as I'm writing the code. Again, typically when you start off, you want to just declare your variables. What data will you have in your program, right? And this, we did an example of how to declare variables, different types of data, using different types of data types in JavaScript. And so we're going to carry this into this example as well. So we'll output this and bring it to the front end, to the output that's going to be written in the browser. So one of the things I want to do is when somebody clicks on that button, which is going to be this aside here, I want to show today's date. All right. So how do I do that? I'm going to use a method from the document object, right? So it's going to be document is the object, and then I have get element. I'm going to use get elements just to demonstrate this here by tag name. And what tag do I want to target? I want to index every tag that is an aside. At this point, I only have one aside tag in my whole entire HTML document. So it's going to be one aside that's going to be held or stored within this get elements by tag name. So I'll say aside. And guess what? I'm going to target the first aside element within the list. Now, if I had two aside elements or elements within my document, it would be two values stored inside of the get elements by tag name. All right. So what I'm going to do here now is attach an add event listener. So this is another method that's from the document object. and it's indicative of what his name is, right? It's going to add an event listener, and we talked about this in the previous video. So add event listener. The first argument here is going to be the event argument, and so the event I want to listen for is a click of the mouse button, right? And there's a lot of different event arguments. You can do it on mouse over, on mouse out. The second argument is going to be a function, what we call an anonymous function, and we're going to talk more about anonymous functions here and how to declare those functions. So essentially, when somebody clicks, the second argument is going to run, right, with some of the statements within this anonymous function. And then what we're going to do is we're going to target the date output element on line 53 and input some text, the date, in between the opening H1 tag here, where my mouse is at, and the closing H1 tag. And that's the purpose of the inner HTML property. So document.get element by ID, right? So I'm using a different method name, get element by ID, as a method of the document object. But what is it going to do? It's going to target an element that's one that's on line 53 by its ID, which is going to be what? Date underscore output. What we're going to do is we're going to change the inner HTML or add some inner HTML into it, right? So we're going to, I'll just do a H2 because we could do it's inner HTML. We can actually add HTML. Here's what we call an escape sequence. The /n basically says new line, and then I'm going to add an H3 of the actual date. Oops, there we go. And then now the thing is I want to add a date here. So what I'm going to do is declare a variable, and this is coming from the date object. So one of the objects that you should study here is the date object, and I'm going to declare a variable. I'm going to say let, I can do var let, and I'm going to say let, the variable name is going to be now equals new, a new object instance, date. And then here I'm going to place, this is called string concatenation, where we can adjoin text. I'll say now and then here I'll just put a comment, and I need my equal sign here, right? The inner HTML is going to equal this text. And again, don't let this throw you off here. These plus symbols or these concatenation symbols is basically adjoining the text. So this is how you would do it in JavaScript. Other languages use a comma. Some languages you would use other symbols to do concatenation, but this is basically allowing this string to be we're concatenating the date within the string text here. So what's going to happen is that when somebody clicks on this aside button element, it's going to run the statement within this function, right? It's going to target the get element by ID on line 53, and it's going to basically in HTML, it's going to put in between the opening H1 and the closing H1, it's going to put this text, right? And then we end each statement with a semicolon. The next thing we want to do here, before we move on, let's just save that to make sure that it works. So we'll save it, and we're going to go is render this back in our browser. And let's just test to make sure that this works. Now, JavaScript is a very finicky language. One misspelled method or property, or if you forget to capitalize a function name, right, it would throw an error, and it would cause your program not to run or even render in the browser. So here, let's go and click it. Boom, there it goes. It works, right? Now, there's some other things I can do to format this, but for the sake of time here, I'm going to leave it as it is, right? So November 9th, 2020. So this is the time I'm actually recording this video. Let's do one more thing here before we close out this video. What we're going to do is we're going to click to show student data, and we're going to basically show or render the data that we declared within on lines 59 and 74. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go down, and we're going to add we're going to do something very similar to what we did here on line 78. I'm going to say document.get. This time here I'm going to get element by ID. So I want to target this get form on line 49. So when somebody clicks on this summary element, right, and it has an ID attribute of get form, right? So I'm going to say get element by ID, which is the get form value. right? What do I want to do? I want to add an event listener, right? So I want to listen for the click when somebody clicks that element. And the first argument is going to be click. And the second argument is going to be whatever code we want to run, and we can use an anonymous function. And again, we're going to talk about anonymous functions at a later date, but just trust that this is an anonymous function, and I'll show you different syntaxes for the various functions that are permitted in JavaScript. So we're going to do something very similar here. So document.get element by ID student, and I want this information to output in between the opening div tag on line 54, div ID student info, and the closing div tag here, right? So here I'll say student is the element that I want to target by its ID attribute. And then what do I want to do is target the inner HTML of that element. And then here I'm going to do something a little bit different. This is another way of doing string output in a string. It's called string interpolation. So I'm going to use what we call a backtick, right? So I'm going to do it again, backtick. It's the key that's right under the escape key all the way up in the upper left hand corner. I'll say H3 this time, and I'll say student name. And with the string interpolation, you have to use this particular syntax. So now this time here, just to show you that I can use either student equals Joe, right? I'm going to change the order of this here, copy that. Right? Because if I kept it the same way, it would basically say student equals Joe, but then it would say declare student again, and then student wouldn't be assigned anything. Well, it would be assigned because it would be assigned here. But this time I'm going to use the object, student object. So how would I call out Joe from this object? And essentially I would call the object name student, right? Dot, and then the property name, which is name. It's kind of very similar to a document, right? Dot get element by ID. Right, so we call the object first. In this case, the object is student, and then we call either the property, and we can also have methods associated with the student as well, right? So in this case here, I'm saying student.name, and that's going to output Joe when we go to output this text. And then here, I'm going to do a / new line, and I'll say age. And this time here, instead of actually doing the student age here, from the object, I'll just pull out the age variable, the numeric variable that we assigned, the numeric data type that we assigned on line 63. So I'll say age here, it's going to be equal to, and I'll do a little bit of string interpolation syntax. You have to use the money sign, age, and then I'll close this off with the H3. And I have to close it off with a backtick, and then close in every statement here with a semicolon. Not sure why that's there. There we go. All right. So, so if we save this and then go to render this in the browser, right? Let's go and render it again. Right click, open in default browser. Right. So here we click on to show today's date. Boom, there's it is. And then when we do show student data, right? So, there's an error in our program, and we're going to talk about troubleshooting our errors here. But if we were to do a F12, right, and you go to console, you'll see that, again, let me do that again here. So this is actually really important. If you're having a hard time like figuring out where's the problem at in your JavaScript code, you can right click and inspect, or you can just click on F12. And so here, if I click on F12, right, and I go to console, and you'll see that it says document.get element by is not a function. So there's an error in my program. So if I click on this here, it's going to show me where I am making a mistake. Now, I'm showing that the error is coming from line 83. So I can go back in my code here and go in and fix that error. So it's get element by, and I'm missing ID, right? So now if I save that, this should work. Again, like I said, JavaScript is a very finicky language where you can easily get confused on some of the concepts, or you can miss something such as the misspelling of a function, but the Chrome developer tools will help you find a mistake there. So now if we click on this here, right, there's our date, and there's our information that we declared in our JavaScript statements and our variables. So in our next video, it's going to be the new PowerPoint presentation. we'll talk about troubleshooting. And so let's go here. Give me 1 second. Oops. All right. So in our next video, we're going to talk about debugging code, and then how to. So this is kind of like how to troubleshoot and debug our code. I kind of already showed you an example of that with the browser tools, but we're going to dive a little bit more deeper into debugging our code. So that'll be in the next video series for JavaScript, which is going to be JavaScript Intro to JavaScript Part 2. So stay tuned for that, and we'll get into some techniques we can use to troubleshoot our code. Hey guys, go ahead and take a stab at the activity. This will be an opportunity to kind of, like I said, get stronger, and we're going to review these in person when we see each other. All right, farewell.